Our philosophy at New Scientist is this: science is interesting, and if you don't agree, you can fuck off. I have experienced plenty of things which could be called transcendental. I've experienced the feeling of almost mystical wonder that I get when I look up at the stars, look up at the Milky Way, contemplate the galaxies receding from us, listen to a Schubert quintet, read a sonnet of Shakespeare. These are all things which only a human mind is capable of doing.
So may I ask you? Okay, sorry.
Only a human mind is capable of doing that. And a human mind is capable of doing those things because the human mind has been put together in the brain as a highly complicated organization that has evolved over some 4 billion years of evolution, putting together nervous systems. It is a stunning achievement of evolution to have put together the human brain that is capable of being moved by such things. I yield to no one in my capacity to be moved by what you call the transcendental. What I do not do, however, is to indulge in mystical nonsense about it being there before there were brains, or the equivalent of brains.
The cases that have prompted this rally are well known, and we could each add our own examples of self-righteous teachers, government officials, politicians, preachers and general do-gooders, all quick to suppress the first hint of a thought that is not approved by the Central Committee of the Multiculturally Correct. These are people who are terrified of the power of words, of drawings, people who don't understand that ideas must be exposed to scrutiny, to challenge, even to ridicule, if we are not to regress into a state of permanent intellectual babyhood. Think of the huge transformations that have taken place in the developed world since the Enlightenment, the enormous progress that's been achieved in science, knowledge, political philosophy, suffrage, the alleviation of poverty, the battle against disease, the abolition of slavery, the place of women in society, and the treatment of minorities. Steadily and surely, albeit with occasional reversals, we've been getting nicer, more humane, less violent. And every single step on that upward path has been at the expense of ideas that someone, usually many people, almost always religious people, held dear. Should the abolitionists have been silenced for fear of offending the slave owners? Should the suffragettes have kept quiet because men were deeply outraged at the very idea of women having the vote? Of course not. If our forebears had been prohibited from causing offense, we'd still be living in a scientific, technological, moral, and political dark age. We have a choice. We can treat humans like delicate hothouse flowers, shielding them from every flutter of a chill wind. Or we can continue the bold pursuit of knowledge, of ideas, of high ideals, and of reality. And that needs freedom of speech. As rationalists, as humanitarians, as campaigners for social justice, we will never resort to violence or threats of violence, and we will never attempt to justify them. But that makes the protection of free expression even more important. For unlike some of our opponents who gleefully resort to violence, actively seek out opportunities to threaten violence, for us, free expression is the only weapon we will ever use. Cherish it. Using only words as weapons, fight for it.
The scientists that I respect are scientists who work hard to be understood, to use language clearly, to use words correctly, and to understand what is going on. We have been subjected to a kind of word salad of scientific jargon used out of context with inappropriately, apparently uncomprehendingly. There is a deep confusion going on here between the properties of things within the universe and the properties of the universe itself. It is one thing to say that the universe contains objects that have sentience and the various other properties that you mentioned. Of course it contains objects that have sentience. We are among those objects. So are dogs. So are chimpanzees. The universe contains sentience. The universe is not sentient. This is the one thing, Deepak, you seem not to understand. You're constantly confusing explanations at the level of what goes on inside the universe with the universe itself. It's not enough to say the universe contains sentience, contains purpose, etc., and say, therefore, the universe is sentient, the universe is purposeful. Evolution, you say, has a purpose, diversity, because what we see is diversity. Of course what we see is diversity. That's the consequence of evolution. But you mistake when you think that evolution is driven towards it.
Time is over.
How
Un
much
applauso.
time do I have to respond? How much time?
The question is not whether individual people who happen to be religious or who happen not to be religious are good or bad. The question is whether religion itself is. I think there are aspects of religion which are bad in themselves. I think that the idea of blind faith, believing something without evidence, and sheltering behind the right to hold faith, such that you can justify doing bad things because your religion, your faith tells you it's the right thing to do. Many good and righteous people who believe themselves to be good and righteous have done terrible things precisely because they believe that they're doing it for their God. So faith, blind faith, can have that bad effect. For myself as a scientist, I'm accustomed to saying that the thing that I really object to about religion is that it teaches us to be satisfied with not understanding, teaches us to be satisfied with pseudo-explanations which are really not explanations at all, things that sound good. Things that sound like an explanation but which really aren't, which appeal to the emotions but don't actually explain anything. So I think that religion in that sense can be the enemy of science, the enemy of truth. But this evening I'm reflecting more that what may really be the enemy of truth and the enemy of science is willful obscurantism, whether it comes from religion or not.
I've just returned from the Jaipur Literary Festival in India. Sir Salman Rushdie, arguably the most distinguished living novelist to come out of India, was due to speak on a neutral subject having nothing to do with the satanic verses. He's spoken at the festival before, but on this occasion, some local Islamic scholar decided to make trouble. I hope you picked up the quotation marks around the word scholar, by the way. A true scholar studies more than one book. Anyway, the row in Jaipur escalated. A baying, hate-filled mob of bearded youths descended on the festival compound, literally threatening murder if Rushdie was allowed so much as a video link to the festival. And I do mean murder under the laws of India, although under Sharia law it might have been called something else. Under pressure from the local government in India, who had an eye to the Muslim vote in the forthcoming elections, the organizers bowed to the mob, and even the video link was cancelled.
Shame!
Here are two possible reasons why one might kowtow to a violent threat such as was visited on the Jaipur Literary Festival. 1. I shall give in to your demands to suppress freedom of speech purely because I fear your threats. But don't for 1 nanosecond confuse fear with respect. I do not respect you. Now, it seems to me that there's nothing reprehensible in such a response. I wouldn't call it cowardly, I would simply call it prudent. But the same cannot be said of the following patronizing and condescending alternative. 2. I shall give in to you because I know that freedom of speech is not part of your culture. Who am I to impose Western colonialist, paternalistic ideas like freedom of speech? on your very different and equally valuable culture.
Nonsense!
Of course, your hurt and offence should take precedence over our purely Western preoccupation with freedom of speech. And of course we'll cancel the video link. Nobody, I think, would express this patronising thought in quite such brazenly explicit terms, but that's the subtext of a great deal of the woolly, liberal accommodationism and appeasement that we saw at the time of the original fatwa and of the Bradford burning of the books, as well as the Danish cartoon affair. Our entire society has gone soft on religion. We need to wake up to the threat that militant faith poses to our whole civilization and stop being so damned respectful.
My attitude to science is that we are fundamentally trying to understand how things work. Science is very difficult. It's very difficult to understand how things work. The hard problem of consciousness has been mentioned, the problem of the origin of the universe, the problem of the origin of life, the problem of how life has this uncanny appearance of being designed, the size of the universe, the scale of the universe, how embryology works. These are all deeply difficult questions. They require hard scientific work, and in all cases, I think I'm right in saying that scientific work consists of explaining complicated things in terms of the interactions of their parts or of simpler things. So we always try to explain complex things in terms of simpler things. We do not resort to magical language. We do not snow our audience with highfalutin sounding words that don't actually mean anything. We use words that actually have meaning. We use expressions that can be tested. We work hard at understanding the universe in terms of its component parts. We don't invent superarching entities which have no explanation in themselves. We don't invoke ideas like the universe has consciousness, the universe has awareness, atoms have awareness. If we have a difficult problem like awareness, we explain it in terms of the interactions between small parts working together in ways that scientists understand. If Freeman Dyson ever said atoms are aware, then he's wrong. I don't think he said it. I think he should sue you.
Wow.
We are all agnostic about really everything, because you can't actually disprove the existence of, you know the argument, fairies and leprechauns and things. So I'm an atheist in the same way as I'm an afairist, and we're all... The onus on somebody who wants to... The onus is on somebody who wants to believe positively in the existence of something for which there is no evidence. And so we should simply shove all gods into the same dustbin as we shove fairies, leprechauns, Thor, Zeus, Mithras, etc. I do not believe that religion is the root of all evil. Thank you, Channel 4. Religion is the root of quite a lot of evil, but that didn't make for a very catchy title. I just want to briefly reply to Dr. Spivey a couple of points. He says we're fighting a losing battle because religion is a part of our human nature. Well, speak for yourself. It's not a part of mine, and it's not a part of the great majority of my friends in universities in England and the United States and elsewhere. He also said, if we had no religion, how would we do without King's College Chapel, the Sistine Chapel, etc.? Well, you know, artists have to make a living, and in the time when the Sistine Chapel was built and its ceiling was painted, you know who had the money. Artists such as Michelangelo had to go where the patronage was. We shall never know the ceiling that Michelangelo might have painted if he had been commissioned to paint the Museum of Science, for example. We shall never know what Haydn's Evolution oratorio might have sounded like, or Beethoven's Mesozoic Symphony.
When we're in school, we learn how to critically argue. So, for example, if we're told, read this book and give your opinion, we have to support that with evidence. Now, most people, be them atheists or theists, will take that skill with them later into life. But how is it that, in your opinion, when it comes to their personal beliefs with regard to religion, they're able to put this down and just accept it on face value?
It is remarkable. I guess you speak with feeling from your home country.
Okay, yeah.
It is remarkable, isn't it, that the sort of people who, in their everyday life, when they're planning a holiday, planning a journey, planning to go grocery shopping, or how to mend their car, use perfectly good logical reasoning, skeptical reasoning. You know, what might have gone wrong with the car? You eliminate things. You use a sort of scientific method, and you use logic and reason and sense. And then, when it comes to religion, it all goes right out of the window. And these very same individuals, who show no deficiency in any other field of life, their entire mental... I mean, Christopher Hitchens says religion poisons everything. It does, and it certainly poisons the ability to use your brain. A quote from Kurt Wise, who is an American geologist. He studied geology at Harvard, no less, under Stephen Jay Gould, no less, and he was set for a good career as an academic geologist, which all his life he had desperately wanted. The problem was, it came from within. It was his religious upbringing, his firewall of faith. And he couldn't reconcile the two, his scientific education with his religion, and he literally got a pair of scissors and went right through the Bible and cut out every verse that would have to go if he accepted his scientific education. And in the end, he decided there was nothing left of his Bible. He therefore tossed out science and said, and from then on, he said, with that in great sorrow, I tossed into the fire all my dreams and hopes in science. And he goes on, I am a young age creationist because that is my understanding of the scripture. As I shared with my professors years ago when I was in college, if all the evidence in the universe turns against creationism, I would be the first to admit it, but I would still be a creationist because that is what the Word of God seems to indicate. Here I must stand. If religion can do that to a highly educated Harvard geologist, just think what it can do to an average school child or student. Thank you. But they teach children that faith is a virtue. They teach children that you don't need evidence for your beliefs. They teach children that it's a good thing to have faith. If they teach children that there will be tempters who will come along and try to sway you by reason, and you should ignore them. So theologians are harmless. The vast majority of religious people are harmless, but they provide a climate in which it is safe for the fundamentalist fanatics to thrive. If you have some kind of fundamental belief in something, some ideal, some political ideal, it might be Marxism, it might be National Socialism, it might be patriotism, it might be the honor of the emperor. There are other things than religion, but religion is a remarkably powerful one, because religion actually teaches that you don't have to justify your beliefs. They're just faith. They're just justified by themselves. And so I think if you're asking me, would the world be a better place without religion, I would unequivocally say yes. If you're asking me, would there be no fanatical fundamentalisms without religion, the answer is no, there would be, because we do have fundamental patriotism, fundamental Marxism, etc. I face two questions. Firstly, is religion true? And second, is it necessary for human psychological welfare or something of that sort? If it isn't true, than for anybody to maintain that somehow humans need it and you're wasting your time trying to get rid of it. What an amazingly patronizing and condescending thing to say. We intellectuals, of course, know that it's not true, but all those poor people out there, they need religion. I mean, what a condescending thing to say about all those people. Either it's true or it's not. And I have enough respect for people to say that if it's not true, people will reconcile themselves to that and will not find any need for it. Now, I was asked a specific question, is it in the genes? Is there some Darwinian reason for religiosity? Maybe there is, but that doesn't bear in the slightest degree on whether it's true. I care about whether it's true. I also care, as a Darwinian, about the origin of it, and I'm interested in the origin of it, and I'm inclined to agree with the implied suggestion of the questioner that it may be that religion itself has no advantage, but it may be that it's a byproduct of some other psychological disposition which does. But that is an entirely separate question from whether it's true, and I don't like it when people say, oh, humans need it, or we have it built into us in our genes, or Darwinian natural selection has built into it, therefore that somehow validates it. Of course it doesn't validate it. It merely says that it's been built into us by natural selection, just as all sorts of other probably disagreeable things have been built into us. Doesn't mean we can't try to cure ourselves.
Right. Okay, can I just...
You're a professor of the public understanding of science, not professor of delivering truth to the public. And these are two different exercises. One of them is you put the truth out there, and like you said, they either buy your book or they don't. Well, that's not being an educator. That's just putting it out there. Being an educator is not only getting the truth right, but there's got to be an act of persuasion in there as well. Persuasion isn't always, here's the facts, you're either an idiot or you're not. It's here are the facts, and here is a sensitivity to your state of mind, and it's the facts plus the sensitivity, when convolved together, creates impact. And I worry that your methods and how articulately barbed you can be ends up simply being ineffective,
yeah,
when you have much more power of influence than what is currently reflected in your output.
I gratefully accept the rebuke. Just one anecdote to show that I'm not the worst in this thing. A former and highly successful editor of New Scientist magazine, who actually built up New Scientist to great new heights, was asked, what is your philosophy at New Scientist? And he said, our philosophy at New Scientist is this: science is interesting, and if you don't agree, you can fuck off.
Thank you. All right. You've done debates all around the world. Have you ever had a clever or interesting argument from the other side?
No. I would just add to that the science of any one century is going to be superseded by the science of future centuries, such that if somebody from, say, the Middle Ages were to be brought back by a time machine to now, they would find mobile phones and computers and jet aeroplanes. They would be indistinguishable from magic. They would appear to be supernatural. So I am a materialist. I don't believe there is anything supernatural. But don't think of that as a denigration of the natural, because if you were to come back in 500 years' time, you wouldn't have seen nothing yet. The physics, the engineering, the biology of 500 years' time will be so far advanced over today's that we might well fall on our knees and worship it as supernatural, but it wouldn't be. It would be the evolved natural.
Do you think there could be one sentence that could convince, let's say, a creationist to seriously doubt their theory? ideally, if you could convince a believer in God to really doubt their belief, but that's too hard.
Not sure about a sentence. I think perhaps the single most convincing fact, the observation that you could point to, would be the pattern of resemblances that you see when you compare the genes using modern DNA techniques, actually looking at the letter-to-letter correspondences between genes. Compare the genes of any pair of animals you like, pair of animals, pair of plants, and then plot out the resemblances, and they fall on a perfect hierarchy, a perfect family tree. And the only alternative to it being a family tree is that the intelligent designer deliberately set out to deceive us in the most underhand and devious manner. Moreover, the same thing works with every gene you do separately, and even pseudogenes that don't do anything but are vestigial relics of genes that once did something. I find it extremely hard to imagine how any creationist who actually bothered to listen to that could possibly doubt the fact of evolution. But they don't listen. I mean, your question is a perfectly good question, but it's not really relevant, because what they do is simply stick their fingers in their ear and say la la la. They know what's true because it's in the holy book. And that even, I mean, the most extreme case is the geologist Kurt Wise, who has a PhD in geology from Harvard, and said, if all the evidence in the universe pointed towards an old Earth, I would be the first to admit it, but I would still be a young Earth creationist, because that is what Holy Scripture teaches me. You cannot argue with a mind like that. A mind like that, it seems to me, is, well, a disgrace to the human species.
The measure of the factuality of evolution is the same as in any other science. Some of the things that scientists have found are found with great confidence. Scientists are always open to the possibility of being proved wrong at some point in the future, but there are some things that seem at any one stage in history far better demonstrated than others. The fact of evolution is about as well demonstrated as anything we know. It is absolutely certain by the normal standards, the same kind of standards as we are certain that the Earth rotates and the Sun doesn't go around the Earth. That formally we have to say, well, that's a hypothesis that might one day be disproved, but we all know that it won't be. And evolution has now come into that category. I don't mean that Darwin's theory of natural selection, at least as the only driving force of evolution, probably should be treated as slightly more uncertain. But the fact of evolution itself, by which I mean the fact that all living creatures that have ever been looked at on this planet are cousins sharing a common ancestor, that is as secure a fact as any in science.
From a genetic standpoint, how do you feel about the God gene, that because 90-some% of the people in the world are religious or do believe in religion? How do you explain that from a human or genetic point of view?
I think I'd probably hesitate to talk about a God gene. There does seem to be a universal tendency for all cultures, for all peoples, to invent gods. And they may differ in detail, but I think I'm right to say anthropologists will tell you that all peoples have gods of some sort or another. It doesn't mean all individuals do, because individuals in any one society may escape from that. But it is a kind of universal feature of humanity, perhaps not quite as universal as sexual desire, but it's sort of like that. So I think there is a genetic tendency to behave in some sort of a way which you might call religious. I prefer to say that it's a psychological predisposition which often manifests itself in the form of religion, but doesn't necessarily have to. And there could be a whole collection of psychological predispositions which together, collectively, lead to religious belief. Things like obedience to authority. And you could easily imagine a genetic basis for obedience to authority which might actually have a Darwinian survival value. It might actually benefit, perhaps especially children, to believe what their parents tell them, what authoritative elders of the tribe tell them. Because if they don't, they might do something dangerous, you know, walk into a fire or over a cliff or something. So a genetic tendency to have a psychological predisposition to believe authority, there might be other ones as well. That's the kind of thing that could manifest itself as religious belief under the right conditions. After all, a child who's been told to do something sensible, like don't pick up snakes, the rule of thumb that's actually genetically coded for wouldn't be don't pick up snakes. It would be believe your parents. And the rule of thumb that says believe your parents would have no way of distinguishing good advice like don't pick up snakes from silly advice or time-wasting advice like, you know, kneel down and pray to the great God of the mountains 5 times a day or something.
Well, do you think that religious belief has anything to do with survival?
I think that the psychological predispositions that have led to religion, like obedience to authority, do have something to do with survival, yes. Whether religion itself has something to do with survival, I don't know. It might have, but that, of course, wouldn't make it true. It would just be an interesting fact.
Although I can't recall ever having kissed a photograph, I have wept when reading poetry, when listening to music. I think that those on this side have come to rather resent the suggestion that religion has a monopoly on emotion, on poetry. On sympathy, on empathy. Everybody in this room, I dare say, has felt deep grief at the sight or the thought of a suffering individual somewhere in the world, maybe even of another species. That does seem to be something in humanity, to feel empathy with suffering. And as a Darwinian, I can offer explanations for that. I won't do it now because there isn't time. But it is a travesty that has somehow become widely accepted that if you throw out religion, you throw out the Good Samaritan, you throw out weeping at a sonnet of Shakespeare or at a Schubert quartet. It has nothing whatever to do with religion in the sense of the supernatural. Of course, you can redefine religion as covering all these emotional, artistic aspects. And in that case, of course, there's no contest. But I suggest that that's confusing and that we need to define religion as belief in something supernatural. You get your beliefs not from evidence, but from faith, from revelation, from tradition, from scripture, from authority. Now, all those are very bad reasons to believe anything. Evidence is the only reason to believe something. And that's the second point that I want to make in closing. But the first one, the main one I want to make is that we are all in this together. We are all capable of the same kinds of emotions. We're all capable of wanting to free the slaves and all the things, all the good things that have been talked about, whether we're religious or not. You cannot give religion the credit for any of those things. They are a part of humanity. The good things are part of humanity, just as the bad things are part of humanity, whether you are religious or not.
I think that religion should be criticized on intellectual grounds as providing a competitor to the scientific explanation of life and the universe. It's educationally pernicious because it gives the idea that you can evade the responsibility to understand things by postulating some sort of easy explanation. Oh, God did it. I think that's educationally pernicious. And as a scientist and as an educator, I'm most interested in that.
However, there are other problems with religion as well. The idea of faith, the idea of believing something without any evidence, the idea of believing something without any evidence tends to make people prepared to do terrible things in the name of their God, because they believe that their God wants them to be a martyr, and they'll go straight to paradise if they do. There's only a minority of them who do that, only an extreme minority. But if the majority of children are brought up to believe that there's some virtue in faith, that there's some virtue in believing something without any evidence, then it will only take a minority to take that really seriously. In a sense, the suicide bombers are the ones who really, really take their religion seriously. And the gentle ones who don't do suicide bombing, they're the ones who don't really take it seriously. But as Sam Harris has said, these people really believe what they say they believe. And they believe it without evidence. And if you